The initial warning came in the form of a lone ship carrying 4 Strand pilots, their many eyes filled with fear as they broadcasted a single, urgent message: avoid human territory. Yet, inevitably, someone would ignore it. The Coron sovereignty, the galaxy's most powerful and arrogant empire, saw it as an opportunity to assert their dominance. Their warships slipped past the designated no-go zone, disregarding all warnings. Captain Thelos stood on the bridge of the warship Dagger's Gleam, a vessel brimming with weaponry. He was confident, his long fingers dancing across the control panel. Humans, he sneered, primitive savages. Their weapons are nothing but junk, their ships are barely functional. His first officer, Rick, was more cautious. Sir, with all due respect, the records, they're likely exaggerated. Thelos dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. We'll overpower whatever pitiful defenses they have, take their mining colonies, and expand the sovereignty as we always do. The fleet moved forward, 20 warships gliding through space with deadly precision, heading toward a small, worn-out world with scattered stations and makeshift defense systems. Thelos couldn't help but smirk. Easy pickings, the humans didn't seem to be panicking, which only made the situation feel stranger. Lieutenant Jack Torin leaned back in his chair, his gaze locked on the approaching fleet. The control room of the Bastion orbital station was cramped, filled with palpable tension. Behind him, Communications Officer Rick Sparky Vega chewed on an unlit cigar, muttering about the overconfidence of the enemy. They're holding formation, Torin said, classic assault strategy. They're not even bothering to mask their approach. That's what worries me, Sparky replied. These guys are all about charging in. You think they're trying to lure us in? Torin smiled slightly. Nope, they think they can't lose. The station shuddered as a crewman shouted. They're within weapons range. ETA to the outer perimeter. 3 minutes. Torin stood up, a grin spreading across his face. All right, it's showtime. Let's light up the welcome party. Sparky hit a button, activating the orbital defense grid. Across the station, dormant platforms sprang to life. Doors slid open to reveal rows of missile launchers and railgun turrets. The Coran fleet faltered for a split second. Then the humans fired. Thelos laughed as the first volley of missiles struck. Pathetic, he scoffed. The human missiles veered off course, some detonating too early or missing altogether. A few merely scratched the paint on the destroyers. His tactical officer smirked. Perfect shot. Their defenses are laughable, Thelos ordered. Tear them apart. The Coran ships retaliated with blasts of brilliant blue plasma, tearing into the human defenses. Several platforms exploded in fiery bursts. But then, something unexpected happened. Sir, we're detecting, the tactical officer began, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden barrage of railgun fire. Massive slugs, too fast for the Coran defenses to intercept, slammed into one of the Coran cruisers. Its shields flared up, then disintegrated, leaving the hull vulnerable to a second slug that ripped through it. The cruiser shattered in a silent, explosive burst. Volvos froze, stunned. Who uses slugs in space? Rick muttered under his breath. Humans, Thelos spat. Evasive maneuvers. Launch the fighters. The destroyers shifted position, rippling as they unleashed swarms of dart-like fighters. The Coran fleet quickly adapted, falling into their signature, flawless attack patterns. Plasma bolts surged toward the railgun platforms, silencing several of them, yet the humans remained steadfast. Inside Bastion's command center, Torin observed the chaos, his fingers drumming against his armrest. They're changing tactics, he noted. About time. Sparky, is the payload ready? All set and ready to go, Sparky replied, his grin wide and manic. Fire! A series of modified cargo pods shot out from the station, heading straight for the Coran fleet sensors. To the untrained eye, they looked like stray debris or misfired missiles. The fighters, focused on the platforms, ignored the pods as they drifted closer to the destroyers. Then, without warning, they exploded. High-yield electromagnetic pulses sent shockwaves through the Coran fleet. Fighters lost power and spiraled out of control. 2 destroyers flickered before going dark, their systems completely fried. Thelos gripped the edge of his console, fury rising in his chest. They're using EMPs in open combat. They're insane. Rick's voice trembled. They're clever. Thelos snapped, his fury taking over. Regroup all remaining ships. Target the station. Wipe them out before a loud crash cut him off. Sir, one of the crew members whispered urgently, panic creeping into his voice. Something's boarding us. The boarding pod smashed through the airlock, and the first human to step through was a grinning maniac, shotgun in hand. Sarge, Mason shouted, enthusiasm practically radiating from him. He stepped over a fallen Coran guard, barking orders to his squad. Move fast, clear the deck and grab anything shiny. And remember, don't shoot the consoles. We're stealing this tub. His men, battle battle-hardened veterans followed in a surge of energy, charging forward with loud whoops and shouts. The Korans, caught completely off guard by the sudden boarding action, scrambled to mount a defense. Plasma bolts zipped past Mason's head as he ducked behind a bulkhead. "Jonas, flank left," he ordered. Private Jonas gave a nod and sprinted into the chaos, tossing a grenade into a cluster of Koran soldiers. The explosion sent alien bodies flying in every direction. Mason's laughter rang out through the comms. "I love it when they underestimate us." On the bridge of the Dagger's Gleam, the Los watched the internal cameras, growing more anxious with each passing second. These humans weren't soldiers, they fought like lunatics, unpredictable and chaotic, but devastatingly effective. "Seal off the lower decks," the Los shouted, his mind racing. "Sir, they've already breached engineering." A new voice crackled through the comms. Mason's voice came through, laced with mockery. "Hey, Captain Lizard, your ship's nice and all, but the lighting's a bit dull. Mind if we brighten things up?" The Los snarled, slamming his fist into the console. The lights flickered, and the ship's systems stuttered. Then, the entire vessel shuddered violently as its engines powered down. Back on Bastion, Torin watched as the Dagger's Gleam drifted helplessly. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Boarding teams doing their thing?" Sparky chuckled. "Think they'll bring us a souvenir?" Torin's smirk widened. "If Mason's in charge, he'll probably steal the whole damn ship." The Koran fleet was in total disarray, formation shattered, their flagship crippled, and their remaining destroyers in full retreat. What should have been a one-sided massacre had turned into a complete rout, and the humans were far from finished. "Launch the drones," Torin commanded. From hidden compartments across the station, hundreds of small, heavily armed drones shot into space. They swarmed the retreating Koran ships, attacking them with relentless aggression, like a swarm of enraged wasps. On the bridge of the Dagger's Gleam, Mason strode in, shotgun casually slung over his shoulder, as if he owned the place. The Los glared at Mason, his teeth bared in a snarl. "Humans," he spat, voice laced with contempt. "You're all mad." Mason's grin was wide, unapologetic. "Maybe, but we're mad with your ship as our prize." Mason leaned back in Thalos's captain's chair, boots comfortably propped up on the console. The bridge was eerily quiet, the only sounds the faint hum of machinery and the occasional crackle of plasma burns cooling in the walls around him. His squad was systematically securing the area, dragging unconscious or wounded Koran soldiers into a corner. Private Jonas, ever the opportunist, rummaged through a Koran officer's ceremonial belt pouch. He pulled out a strange glowing orb. "Hey, Sarge," he called. "Think this is worth anything?" Mason shrugged casually. "If it's shiny, it's valuable." From the corner, the Los seethed, his anger palpable. He bared his sharp teeth and hissed, "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Sovereignty will send 100 ships to avenge this humiliation." Mason chuckled and gestured toward the viewport. "Yeah, they can try, but judging by how things are going out there, they might want to rethink that." Outside, the battlefield was pure chaos. The Koran fleet, once so proud, was now in full retreat, pursued relentlessly by swarms of human drones. These tiny, aggressive machines darted between the massive destroyers, relentlessly attacking with pulse blasts and magnetic bursts. One Koran cruiser vented atmosphere as its shields failed, a steady stream of debris trailing behind it. The human orbital platforms, though still taking hits, fought back like cornered animals. Railgun platforms fired in coordinated volleys, keeping the remaining Koran ships constantly on the move. Every so often, a lucky missile strike would tear through a destroyer's engines, sending it spinning aimlessly into the void. The Los, watching in disbelief, muttered, "You people are insane." Mason gave a casual shrug. "Yeah, we get that a lot." On Bastion, Torin watched the chaotic feed from Mason's helmet cam, a small smile tugging at his lips. The boarding action was brutal, but in its chaos, it had an almost poetic beauty. "Looks like they've got the bridge under control," Sparky noted, chewing his unlit cigar. "What's the plan now?" "Think Mason's going to bring the ship back here?" Sparky asked, eyeing Torin. Torin shook his head. "Nah, he's not that reckless." A crewman snorted. "You're talking about the same guy who once tried to hotwire a Koran cruiser with a fork and a power cell." Torin sighed. "Fair point." Suddenly, the station shook as a plasma blast struck one of the docking arms. Alarms screamed, and the lights flickered for a moment. Torin turned to Sparky. "Status on the outer platforms?" "3 are down," Sparky answered grimly. "The rest are holding, but if those destroyers regroup, they won't be." Torin's voice remained steady as he replied, "Because we're about to take take away their regrouping point, he keyed his comm, Mason, how's it looking over there? On the dagger's gleam, Mason tapped his earpiece. Oh, just making myself at home. We've got control of the bridge, engineering's locked down, and Captain Lizard here is being a real ray of sunshine. The Los growled low in his throat. Good, Torin responded. We need you to push them harder. If those destroyers manage to form up again, this could get ugly. Mason grinned wide, his tone eager. You want me to pick a fight? You got it, boss. He turned to his squad. All right, boys, let's see what this baby can do. Rig the engines for a jump. Something short, something messy. I want them to think we're losing control. Jonas blinked in confusion. Sarge, you sure about that? What if we do lose control? Jonas asked, voice tinged with concern. Mason shrugged nonchalantly. Then it's their problem too. The dagger's gleam lurched as its engines roared back to life. It wasn't a smooth startup. Plasma vents sputtered, and the lights flickered ominously, but it was enough to send a clear message to the remaining Corrin fleet. Volvos's eyes widened in horror as he realized what Mason was doing. You're using my ship as bait, he spat. Mason slapped him on the shoulder with a grin. Dingo, thanks for the donation. The human-controlled destroyer veered sharply, its course unpredictable and erratic. It fired its remaining weapons in seemingly random directions, forcing the Corrin ships to scatter. To the untrained eye, it appeared as though the humans were struggling to control the massive vessel, but Torin knew better. On Bastion, he watched with a sharp eye as the destroyer's erratic maneuvers corralled the Corrin fleet closer to the station's remaining railgun platforms. They're taking the bait, Sparky observed with a grin. Of course they are, Torin replied, his voice dripping with confidence. They think we're idiots. The first railgun volley slammed into a Corrin destroyer, splitting it in half. The second volley followed, obliterating its partner. Only 3 Corrin ships remained in fighting condition. Meanwhile, on the dagger's gleam, Mason was enjoying the chaos. Jonas, give me a status update. Engines are holding barely, Jonas called back. Weapon systems are toast though. Doesn't matter, Mason said. We've done our part. Torin, you ready to finish this? He asked. Torin's voice crackled over the comm. See ready and waiting. Mason's grin widened. All right, boys, time to bail. Rig the reactor for an overload and prep the escape pods. Volvos's eyes went wide with horror. You're insane. You'll destroy the entire ship. Mason's grin never faltered. Yep, that's the idea. Minutes later, the dagger's gleam exploded in a blinding flash, sending a shockwave rippling through space. The remaining Corrin ships were thrown into disarray, and the human drones swarmed in to finish off the stragglers. Back on Bastion, Torin leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath of relief. Status? He asked, his voice calm but taut with the tension of the past few minutes. Sparky answered, almost in disbelief, enemy fleet is neutralized. The survivors are running with their tails between their legs, and Mason's squad made it back in one piece. Torin muttered, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Of course they did. The aftermath of the battle was quiet, but not peaceful. The control room of Bastion was alive with the sound of frantic repairs, shouted orders, and the constant hum of activity as the crew worked to assess the damage. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt circuits and overheated machinery. Lieutenant Torin stood at the center of it all, staring at the tactical display. The remnants of the Corrin fleet, a ragged handful of damaged ships, were retreating toward the Sovereignty's borders, their engines firing at full power. Torin knew this wasn't over. The Corrins wouldn't let such a defeat slide without retaliation. You think they'll be back? Sparky asked, tossing his unlit cigar from one hand to the other. Torin's gaze hardened. They'll be back, he said, with more ships, bigger guns, and an even bigger chip on their shoulders. Sparky grinned, his enthusiasm unwavering. Good. I was starting to get bored. The comm crackled to life, and Mason's voice came through, playful as always. Bastion, this is Mason. You miss me yet? Torin smiled, shaking his head. Damn right, he said. We're bringing in the escape pods now. Got a few souvenirs too, I think. Jonas stole a chair from the bridge. Torin pinched the bridge of his nose. Just dock, Mason. Minutes later, Mason and his squad stepped onto the station's docking bay, grinning like lunatics. Mason had his shotgun casually slung over one shoulder and wore a dented piece of Corrin armor as a makeshift trophy. Torin, standing nearby, looked them over. What the hell is that? He asked, pointing at the pile of junk they were hauling with them. Engineering samples, Jonas said with a shrug. Torin stared at him for a long moment before shaking his head. Fine, just don't blow anything up. No promises, Jonas replied, his grin never fading. As the squad dispersed, Mason walked over to Torin, clapping him on the shoulder with a cheerful grin. Not bad for a day's work, huh? Torin raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. You call this work? You hijacked a Corran destroyer, crashed it into their fleet, and nearly got yourself killed. Mason's grin widened. Yeah, but it worked. Torin sighed, clearly frustrated. You're impossible. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the humans' victory had already become the talk of every major channel. Grainy footage of the dagger's gleam veering through space, explosions lighting up the void, was broadcast everywhere. Analysts eagerly dissected the battle tactics, either marveling at the human ingenuity or condemning their recklessness. On diplomatic channels, the reactions were mixed. The cautious Uruns called for sanctions against humanity, decrying their aggressive tactics as a threat to galactic stability. Meanwhile, the warlike Dravins sent emissaries offering tentative alliances, intrigued by the humans' combat prowess. Back in the Corran High Command, Admiral Vori slammed his fist onto the table in fury. This humiliation will not stand. The humans must be crushed once and for all. The other officers nodded in agreement, but one, a younger strategist named Kravos, hesitated. With all due respect, Admiral, Kravos said, we underestimated them once. Doing so again would be a mistake. Vori shot him a glare. Then what do you suggest? Kravos leaned forward, his expression calculating. They fight like no species we've encountered before. They're unpredictable, chaotic, and stupid. Vori interrupted, voice dripping with disdain. No, sir, Kravos replied calmly. Dangerous. Back on Bastion, the humans were celebrating. The mess hall was packed with off-duty crewmen, all swapping war stories and toasting their victory. Mason was at the center of it all, recounting his boarding action with exaggerated flair. And then I told the lizard captain, thanks for the donation, Mason said, grinning as his audience erupted in laughter. Torin stood at the edge of the room, nursing a cup of coffee, watching his men enjoy themselves. He didn't often join in the revelry, he rarely did, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Against all odds, they'd held the line. Sparky walked over, cigar clenched between his teeth. You should relax, Lieutenant. For now, Torin replied, his gaze still fixed on the crowd. Sparky shrugged, leaning against the counter. That's all that matters, isn't it? One fight at a time. Torin didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the viewport where the wreckage of the battle still floated silently in space. The humans didn't know it yet, but the galaxy was watching. In shadowed chambers and gleaming council halls, alien leaders debated what to do about the upstart species on the edge of known space. Some called for preemptive strikes, others for alliances. But one thing was clear, humanity had proven itself. They weren't the strongest, the most advanced, or the most disciplined, but they were survivors. And in the cold, unforgiving expanse of the galaxy, that was enough to make them very, very dangerous.